So to Stacey's point, is she still here? Okay, so I was involved in the, not the Australian, the UK national rollout, and OCM, organizational change management with the physicians, is the most important success factor you need to hit, because you know, the physician community, if they're not engaged and buy into the change won't happen. So. Obviously, we're here to talk about IT infrastructure transition. So starting from left to right, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do during your 8-hour day?
Yeah, there's no such thing as an 8-hour day. I'm Monica Farah-Stapleton. I'm the chief engineer for PM DIMSM. That's the organization responsible for the rollout of the electronic health record that Ms. Cummings was just alluding to. I'm responsible for all technical activities from requirements management elicitation through cyber and the interaction with the sites as they try to employ this new health record.
Hi, oh, there we go.
We already know who you are.
You already met me. So just for, if you weren't here early this morning, I'm Chris Anello. I'm Federal Healthcare Advisory Solution Consultant for ServiceNow, and really just helping with our customers drive innovation through the ServiceNow platform and really see how technology can help meet some of those business objectives.
I am Amy Haseltine. I work at the Department of Health and Human Services. I serve as the Deputy CIO for our Office of Enterprise Services. In terms of my perspective, and I'm so privileged to be on a panel with such distinguished individuals this afternoon, I come to this space with really 3 vantage points. Certainly, number one, I am a public servant at heart, have been one my entire federal career. Secondarily, I'm totally a policy wonk. Love the notion of making good public policy, and really technology is a way to help make that happen. Technology is an enabler of program. And then third and finally, I have been a patient in our national healthcare system, and so the importance of understanding how technology can drive and encourage patient-centered care and making sure that from a public policy perspective, we've got those patients at the center of our thinking is a great way to think about technology, particularly as we come into the 21st century. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. So we'll start with you. So from an IT infrastructure standpoint, do you feel that the government is moving fast enough to keep up with AI and blockchain? You know, obviously they're at the bleeding edge, but you know, in the past we've struggled to keep up with some of the other technologies like fax machine replacement, right?
It's a great question. I won't give you any specific year context as to the fact that I remember when email came and fax machines were a critical part of our day-to-day business planning, making sure we had enough time in the queue in our business data. Send the fax, wait for the piece of paper to spit back out from the fax to make sure somebody got it on the other side. But I have appreciated the need to utilize technology, particularly as we're moving in a world with multidimensional problems. So public policy making, as you all probably know, and frankly the policy challenges we face today are really multidimensional in nature. We don't talk about cancer just from the perspective of which, you know, how we address carcinogens or how we approach an oncology word. We think about cancer certainly from an HHS perspective, with not only the short-term and immediate requests in mind, but how do we address these challenges from a clinical standpoint? How do we address them from a patient standpoint? How do we address them from a financial standpoint? And so the reason that technology and being able to be agile or facile in the world today is that technology is in fact moving at a speed that is often faster than the way in which the federal government moves. Does that mean we're not interested? Absolutely not. We totally are. I think the good news is, at least from an HHS perspective, is that we recognize that enabling technology and adopting innovative technology is critical to how we're going to keep our foot in the 21st century and keep our eyes on the horizon until the 22nd. So we're thinking about technology and innovating technology from 2 standpoints, or really 3. First, making sure that as we adopt that innovative technology, we have got an infrastructure in place that is stable, that is able to take on that new tech in a way that we're able to sustain it not just today, but going forward. Secondarily, we want to make sure that as we adopt and look toward innovative and emerging technologies, we do so in a way that is secure. we've heard already many colleagues talk about the importance of sharing data across multiple spaces, making sure that that data is accessed and shared in a safe and secure manner, but making sure as well that our infrastructure is not overtly or terribly predetermined or pre-vulnerable to cyber threats. So infrastructure and making sure that that is stable from a cyber perspective is equally important. And then finally, again, echoing a sentiment from earlier panelists, we need to make sure that our governance is equally ready to encourage and adopt and then ultimately industrialize that emerging technology. Whether it's blockchain or AI, HHS is trying to look through that lens of governing emerging technology as a way to move mission forward.
Thank you. Dr. Stapleton, from an engineering perspective, would you like to talk about that same subject?
Sure. So let me offer a definition of infrastructure so that we can, so I think you can understand the complexity of the world that we're in with MHS Genesis. In and of itself, MHS Genesis is a system of systems. That system of systems is being put into an existing environment with legacy systems, various levels of modernization. We have multiple partners that we exchange with, both in the federal space and in private sector. And to make all of that work, you need some sort of governance. So the problem that we have very often in DoD, in the federal government, is you have the extremes of, we're DoD and we're crazy, right, in terms of cyber and many other topics. And then there's the perception that the commercial space is the wild, wild west. And both of those things aren't true. So we need to come to center. But to come to center, you can't expect the technology itself is going to change the infrastructure, change the people, change the processes. There's a fundamental requirement that needs to be satisfied before you can insert the technology in a way that can be used by a broader community. And so what we found with MHS Genesis was the technology, even though it was complicated, was almost simplistic compared to putting it in an environment where people need to be trained, they need to become more comfortable with the technology they're being given. Some of their processes that they're very comfortable with are no longer being viewed the same way. And so we had this huge transformation that was socio-technical in nature, not technical in nature. So I think I agree with all of your comments, and I do think, though, as a practitioner, because I enjoy theory, I enjoy the theory of technology, but as a practitioner, there's a reality, a practicality of execution that somehow or sometimes gets overlooked because you're so enamored with the technology. And if you step back and you say, why am I doing this? How do I ensure that some of my techniques, put cyber as a baseline, foundational element of what I'm building and what I'm deploying? And then from that emerges some of the challenges that you then deal with. Well, then you deal with the challenges. One of the earlier panelists mentioned that, software is not a black art. I totally agree with that. It is a science, it's a discipline, it's an engineering application just like anything else. And so if we acknowledge that these new systems in the health IT domain are software-intensive systems, meaning that they're operating on data, you can see how, looking at a medical device that's associated with a system that has a human looking at an end-user device that's connected over a network to a centralized hosting environment where multiple applications are being offered up. When you look at that entire end-to-end, you can see where the technology is valuable, but the process to make sure the technology is relevant is even more valuable. And sometimes we forget that as we put our processes and our technology in place.
Okay, and in terms of the roadblocks you've encountered on that journey, the major roadblocks you've hit on that journey of modernization in DoD, what are the major roadblocks?
I think one of them, well, there's several, obviously. One of them is just the sheer scale and unintentionally siloed infrastructures. And those aren't technical silos, they're also programmatic and human silos. Again, people do what they know, and they're very comfortable with that. So we're from PEO DHMS. We have our partners at DHA, as Ms. Cummings had pointed out. And just being able to bridge those two organizations that have a common strategy is challenging because we don't have necessarily a common mental model. So if you know what your target is, then you can all push towards that target. If the target is disparate or the target is ambiguous, then you have to deal with the programmatic and the social challenges of trying to facilitate this new technology or this new capability into the existing environment. So I think the biggest challenge is really transforming people and the way they think to accept the technology as you're trying to insert it.
OCM, back to my...
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So, Chris, from your perspective, you're supporting a lot of infrastructure globally. You know, what can you do to ensure that the government is in the right place and ready to support these new technologies?
And I think something mentioned earlier is adopting innovation and new technologies. I think that we speak with a lot of federal CIOs, and the challenge they're facing is they see what's going on in the market. They see blockchain, they see AI, and the challenge is, okay, I want to bring that into my organization, but how can I first do all the research, and then, and then the contracting process, put contracts in place, get funding ready. It's maybe a 2-year cycle until they can actually bring that technology into their organization and leverage that. So I think the intention is there, but sometimes I think the federal government does have to be regulated. Obviously, it's tax dollars, and you can't just spend that money. But what we find is that platforms like ServiceNow is where you can have partnerships with industry, where the partners can bring innovation to the organization. So what ServiceNow has done as a platform is we invest a lot in these new technologies, but offer it to our customers as part of that platform solution.
So how does the platform support change management and governance specifically?
So for example, obviously, ServiceNow is very aligned to ITIL, so there's change management in ServiceNow. There's also ideation and intake of demand of new requirements, and that's more of a business process, but really breaking silos across the organization on a single data model. So I think we spoke a lot about, for example, DoD and adopting a commercial health, it's a healthcare platform. Right now, you have a platform in place, and we've seen that. I'm not saying ServiceNow is end all be all as an IT solution. We see that in the enterprise, we're going away from let's do application rationalization. There's all these point solutions where we have a point issue, we bring in a point solution, and then we kind of shake hands, have a deal, and walk away. Right? It's really now how can we be an integrated solution across our enterprise, and how can we share data across these diverse platforms? So CIOs are now saying, can I pick 3 or 4 or 5 really powerful platforms I can use that will, there's building that trust between, the service providers and the customer, right? So software as a service, infrastructure as a service, really take that, I know that the government is not in the business of IT, right? Some of these, cloud providers, AWS, Azure, they take care of that infrastructure, right? The government provides their regulations, their requirements, their policies, and have the vendors be experts in delivering those services to those requirements. Obviously, it's a process, right, that we have to work together.
Right. They still have fax machines, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. So Amy, to be honest, health IT is my real passion as well. I know you were involved in the opioid epidemic problem. How can infrastructure help support that mission that you have, or passion, if it's not a mission?
That's a great question, so thank you. So the application you're referencing is called the Rapid Opioid Alert and Response application. It's one developed by our substance abuse and mental health services colleagues. They are really the experts and have the national lead on how we address the opioid epidemic across this country. The Department of Health and Human Services, though, is taking a more integrated look at how we combat the opioid challenges that are facing this country. Our Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes for Health, HRSA, Indian Health Service, all of those operating divisions and many others are taking a hard look at how we can use technology to better understand areas of risk, put ourselves in a space where we can be more responsive and engage, in particular, individuals at the community level. So where there are spikes in overdoses, and this is in particular reference to ROAR, we can alert our community folks and make sure that they are able to interact with the user community and help facilitate access to services. I think in a broader space, though, and in response to your question about infrastructure, And also in response to the commentary about acquiring and desiring the shiny new toys that IT can provide, we want to make sure that we're doing that in a thoughtful, methodical fashion. So certainly as we begin to talk with our operating divisions about how do we modernize our technology and our mission footprint, how do we enable mission going forward, and with this notion in particular about the opioid challenges that the country's facing, we are asking each of our operating divisions two basic questions. Number one, what is the data you need to help you make decisions and make determinations and respond to this particular mission critical threat? Number two, do you have the data you need? And if not, how can you access that information in a safe, secure manner and allow that information to be shared across the portfolio? I think it's interesting to hear your commentary about CIOs and in particular government not being in the business of IT. I think where we're trying to get to at HHS is to allow CIOs to be part of the conversation about the mission. So maybe less about the tech, and totally your point, it's sometimes less about the technology and all about the mission and being able to integrate a conversation across programmatic silos. The tech can sometimes be the unifier of that dialogue, and taking a holistic and enterprise-wide strategy toward shoring up infrastructure to ensuring we have a strong cyber posture and to really thinking about data as an asset that can be shared across the space helps us address things like opioids as well as many of the other multifaceted public health policy challenges.
So, I see AI and machine learning as being a fantastic tool to address some of those things. On the flip side of it, from an engineering standpoint, that requires a huge amount of compute power to drive all of that. How do you see that compute power being controlled? Because it's a bit like a data plan in my mind. If I give my child a brand new phone, they're going to download, a ton of movies, and all of a sudden I have, a huge cell phone bill. So the government's going to have massive cloud compute bills as soon as you start using these platforms. So what is the strategy to govern, maybe, or to engineer to support the new age?
Appetite suppression is a very good thing. As Colonel Scott mentioned earlier, there are tremendous opportunities for us to take advantage of the data sets within DoD, and everybody wants them. And everybody wants the analytical platforms, the fancy terminology, the whole thing. There is a reality to understanding, to your point, what data do you need? Why do you need it? How do you want to operate on it? What tools are necessary to do that? And then how do we systematically put that infrastructure in place or scale it if it's already in place so that we can provide the capability to the people who need to use it? If you just look at our users are like every other user on the planet. They want everything, and they want the coolest things that they can get because there may be some little manipulation of a data set that they hadn't considered before, which is totally awesome. The reality is, you can't practically do that. The DoD has to be very careful in that we are not like our partners in private industry where they definitely need to operate in the black and they're held accountable for that. The market influences aren't applied in our space the same way. So we have to be much more sensitive to enforcing what is it that we need to do, why we need to do it, what's the benefit of doing that, what's the business case, frankly, and do we allow ourselves to be innovative with our programmatic strategies in the same way we're being innovative with our technical strategies so that we can offer this to our users. So there are definite infrastructures out there we can leverage, cloud as a technical implementation as well as cloud as a concept. And so we can take advantage of those things, but the question that we constantly have to ask is why and what's the return on investment of time as well as financial contributions.
And I guess it's no different than new clinical practice, right? It needs to be justified. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and again, we have very innovative, very capable users in our space, and they want this, and they should have something. The balance, as always, is what is it that we do want to offer, and how quickly can we provide it for their use?
Yeah. So in terms of bringing in things quickly, does the agency trust innovation? How does innovation get into the ecosystem in a way that it's not legacy before it's implemented?
Right. So I would offer that innovation isn't only technical. It's
right.
it's beyond that. It's how do you innovate it? Do you innovate in the contractual space? How do you innovate in sharing the comments or the concepts with people that may not necessarily agree? They may be a bean counter and have no idea that you need some capability because it's transforming. There are people that do trust innovation. They do trust the modernization of the technology. But we do, like everybody else, we hit a brick wall sometimes when it comes to contracts and the speed with which we're able to insert this technology into our infrastructure. Sometimes we're very successful. It's fast. Other times it takes a little longer than any of us would like. But it's not because we don't recognize that it's slower than we would like. It's because we're trying to fight the process that doesn't really support what our intentions are and the timeline that we're interested in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And from HSS's perspective?
I absolutely agree and echo our good colleague's commentary. I think that in addition to that, I would hearken back to one of the earlier themes mentioned, which is that when it comes to innovation, we're really talking about people, process, policy, and system. And sometimes the tech in and of itself is not the hardest thing to do. It's the other cultural shifts that need to take place. In terms of how we at HHS approach that, I would say we're looking at it in really two fundamental ways. First, we're thinking through and launching an initiative called Get With It, which is G squared for governing and guiding, E for emerging, and then with IT technology. And we're looking at that particular initiative to help us ensure that we have the right governance process in place, but that we are not using governance as a stop to innovation, but really as a way to facilitate innovation. I think additionally, innovation means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So what might be innovative for HHS, and maybe at the departmental level of HHS, may not even be in the ballpark of innovative at our National Institutes of Health colleagues. They may be 10 times and 10 light years ahead of us. But the point of either one of those vantage points is that the notion of innovation can and should be embraced. We're doing that by working with our industry partners, talking about and understanding their own roadmap toward IT modernization. We're also bringing our CIO community together to have a cultural conversation about where is the program need, not just today, but in the 22nd century. What are the kinds of things that our patients are going to need, not just today, but again in the years to come? Everybody walks around with a cell phone. It's a great example. 20 years ago, I think phones were sitting in our cars and they were giant, probably about 12 inches long, maybe 2 pounds. And we thought that was super cool. Now, handheld devices are in everybody's back pocket. And that is a way in which people access their medical information, they make appointments, they buy things. And in fact, we need to think about the ever-presence of technology as a way that we approach healthcare. And we need to understand that. And the faster that we have the cultural conversation, the easier it will be to then bring in technology in a safe and methodical fashion, which is part of our goal.
I tend to agree. ServiceNow had a vision search last year. We had a new CEO that came in, and he was very much into servant leadership. And he saw what we were doing as a company, and he came up. We have a new slogan. It's making work for people, really. And it's really about people in the end of the day. And healthcare is about patients. So how can we drive innovation? So all the innovation ServiceNow is investing in is how can we make that work environment better for people? Really not IT for the sake of IT, or systems for the sake of supporting systems. It's more, how can we leverage these systems so that we enable our practitioners or our people in the field or our combatants to be more effective in how they do. And then this goes back to the mission, right? Contributing to that, the mission of the agency or the organization is coming back to, if I need data, what do I need? What's the decision I need to make? Or what am I trying to achieve is a starting point. Technology will be a result of that, I think, and it has to adapt to that, quickly. Because what we don't want to have is have a computer be our boss, right? It has to be the other way around, and we want to make sure that we have us from industry have that in mind, the right governance in place, eliminate biases in machine learning and things like that. That really, at the end of the day, it is about people.
Yeah. So, do you feel the government has the right tools in place to support innovation today?
I think we're getting there.
You're getting there.
I think we're getting there. I think each department across the government probably has a slightly different view on this. I think at HHS As I said, we are very serious in our quest and in our roadmap toward IT modernization government-wide. There has been a push by the administration, whether it's through the President's management agenda or the legislation that was passed on the Hill for the Modernizing Government Technology Act. There is an acknowledgement that we as a federal community need to do something different to reinforce and, frankly, improve upon the existing infrastructure. I think cyber issues are facing every single organization, and the faster that we understand that and see the linkage between the existing and legacy IT and where that creates additional cyber vulnerabilities, we can then, in my view, leverage that as an opportunity to bring in new types of technology.
I've been given the wind-up signal, so go really quickly.
Okay, so I was just going to offer, DoD is .mil, unlike .gov. So we have a few things that are available to us in the .mil space that allow us to do innovative things with cyber, innovative things with infrastructure. And the health IT community in DoD is learning a lot from the other communities within DoD, the weapons systems, integrated C4ISR. So as we apply those techniques to the health IT space, I think we're going to be able to share with a much broader community many of those lessons and many of those innovations that are new to health IT and military health, but not necessarily new to DoD, and something that can be offered as part of the national dialogue.
And to that point, actually, I worked for a company that had a missile guidance system. They adapted the software to support sepsis identification in hospitals. So it's very real. Okay, do we have time for questions? Anybody? No? We have a question. You've already had 2 questions, sir. That lady at the front.
So with a lot of the projects that we've worked on, there's been some infrastructure roadblocks, including cloud-to-cloud, for example, using SaaS products, and how that works around with the TIC 2.0 architecture that's currently deployed policy. Has there been any consideration around modernizing TIC 2.0 to TIC 3.0 and supporting cloud-to-cloud for SaaS products in particular?
So I'll answer it at a very general level. I think HHS is working collaboratively across different components to better understand how we can best leverage the cloud technology. We are really at the very basic levels of thinking through that maturity roadmap. I think government-wide there has been an encouragement for cloud first, and certainly we want to continue to push that in, particularly as we look toward decreasing some of the hardwiring, if you will, to take advantage of a more flexible way of storing and exchanging information. But we're still really at the forefront of beginning that dialogue, and we'll do so as we look toward our broader IT modernization efforts.
Yeah, I would offer that, I would distinguish between cloud technology and cloud implementation. In DoD, we are very excited at the prospect of using cloud infrastructures as long as they can maintain our cyber posture, and that's always the challenge. So in the DoD space, we have lots of little things that we put in place when we're protecting an enclave: kill switches, cyber monitoring tools, checking the software itself to make sure that there isn't something hidden that might get mischievous. When we expand that to try and use commercial offerings, we have to be sure that there's some sort of comparable infrastructure in place, again, without getting into DoD crazy about you're locking down the infrastructure so much you can't use it. So there's a balance that needs to be explored, and we're actively trying to do that so we can take advantage of these infrastructures in a safe way.
Over to you.
I was just going to say thank you. Thanks, GovCIO Media. This has been a great event. And I'm Kathleen Delano, CEO of PMICUS. And I really wanted to focus on the comment about culture. Because the old saying goes, culture eats innovation for lunch every day of the week. And I did a small study that changed my entire career. One of the findings, and I would just kind of ask the panel and the audience. So I did a study, and one of the findings was that those agencies least likely to commit malfeasance were most likely to bend over backwards in compliance with rules and regs and policies designed to curb malfeasance. And the study concluded that risk aversion is in and of itself becoming a national security risk. Extreme risk aversion has become a national security risk, and I would just ask whether that was something that you accorded with.
Well, I mean, we have to make risk-based decisions, right? Otherwise, you really can't take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. So if we're going to be concerned, to the point where we can't use these offerings, then we're doing ourselves a tremendous disservice. I think somebody said earlier, you have to anticipate you're going to be exploited. So there are all sorts of things you can put in place to mitigate the exploitation, right? So why not do that at the outset? And if you take that approach, then you can make a risk-based decision because you're already thinking in those terms, as opposed to, here's my infrastructure, it's totally awesome, it's everything you want, oh, I have to overlay all these cyber controls to the point where you can't use it anymore. And that's one of the things that we struggle with in the health IT space, is at some point you have to decide, are you going to take the risk or you don't get the opportunity to take advantage of the offering. And we don't want to be that crazy, quite frankly.
Yeah, on kind of combining TIC 2.0 and this kind of fear of new technology. ServiceNow is cloud. It's in a FedRAMP environment, so we follow all the NIST guidelines and all that good stuff. But some of our customers do say TIC 2.0, and I was kind of in a joking conversation with one of our customers, security officer, says, we are so compliant, we're almost offline, right? and it was kind of an internal joke, but really it finally took an executive to say, no, we need to innovate. We're hemorrhaging because we cannot innovate, and we're using these legacy systems. They're very secure. And I think it's striking that balance, right? I think there's regulation to help strike that balance. And when it doesn't, you have to assume the risk. Is the benefit going to outweigh that risk, right?
I would echo and agree with all of the commentary. I would add one additional sentiment. We are working very hard at HHS to shift from a risk-adverse culture to a risk-aware culture. I think that as a general matter, when you get up in the morning, you live in a world of risk. And we still get up and we still walk out of the house and we still do stuff and drive cars. And that is a risk model in and of itself. The federal government is not terribly different in my view personally. And I think within HHS, we're striving to foster risk awareness, because the more you are aware and understand, the better prepared you are to mitigate and address risk over time. Additionally, as it relates to technology, legacy technology in and of itself is a risk. But understanding that risk only empowers you then to make decisions about it. Can you make them all the time in the way you wish? No. But at least being aware of it gives you the ability to be prepared and mitigate it going forward. So.
Thank you. Any more?
Just one quick one. Sorry. Thank you all panelists for the presentation, for being here so late for us. Amy, this question is for you. And it's uh-oh. No, it's pretty benign. Well, relatively.
We'll see.
Okay, so, all right, so from our perspective, when you talk about risk averse and risk aware, in the contracting world, there's also this risk assignment, right? It's either the contractor absorbing risk or the government absorbing risk, ideally sharing it relatively equally. In your world, actually in our world too, when requirements are documented, they're very prescriptive. Do this, do that, do this, do that. Well, to adopt a lot of these technologies, it requires a more open-minded, iterative approach. Correct. So given that you have to work with decentralized CIOs who kind of have their own, power, how do you persuade, convince, and influence those CIOs to really adopt that more risk awareness or risk assignment model, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. I think it's about 10 questions in one, but we'll try to deconstruct.
If you want to have it offline, I know we're pressed for time.
Right. So I'll give you the shorter answer is I think at least within HHS, our CIO community is eagerly aware and ready to embrace this notion of risk awareness, because that is the space they live in every day. Certainly you're correct that when we put together requests for proposals, we can do so in a more prescriptive fashion or perhaps a more flexible fashion through a statement of objectives. I think the other piece, though, that we are looking toward is the notion of shifting from more of a waterfall methodology to one of an agile methodology. And I just say you gave me the fist pump, so I'm thinking that's the good answer. But within and across the HHS space, the adoption of an agile methodology does need to be driven at the forefront by what is the mission and what is the end in mind. What is your goal and end in mind? Because some things should be more agile and some things maybe just shouldn't be. But the bottom line is that when you're creating, whether it's a request for a proposal, you need to do so with an integrated look at what the end is that you're trying to achieve. And by getting those people on the front end, program, technology, the money folks, the acquisition folks, you can have a more holistic discussion and proposal put forth with clearer outcomes identified, and then create a process that gives you the space to do that type of innovation going forward. So hopefully I answered that question for you in a helpful fashion.
Thank you. Well, let's put your hands together for the great panel. Thank you.